The Duke of Cranemoor knocked at his wife's door at 10:15 at night, which he had not done in 5 years of marriage, and no one answered. He knocked a second time. There was something in the quality of the silence beyond the panels, not the silence of a woman asleep, nor of a woman choosing not to hear, but a thinner thing altogether, and after a moment Alden turned the handle without leave, which he had never done either. The fire had been out for hours. The bed was made. He stood in the doorway with his candle and looked at a room that had been swept and set to rights the way a room is set to rights when nobody means to come back to it. The dressing table was bare except for 3 things laid out in a row on the wood: the Cranemoor pearls in their case, the sapphire ring that had been his mother's, and the marriage settlement in its brown envelope, squared off at the edges. Everything he had ever given her was on that table. Nothing else in the room was. He opened the wardrobe. The gowns he had ordered from town were all there. The grey silk, the blue, the 2 he could not remember her ever wearing, hanging in their linen bags. The plain things she wore about the parish were gone, and her walking boots were gone, and the worn tartan shawl that his aunt had once called a disgrace was gone. Her workbox was gone. Her books were gone. There were 4 pale rectangles on the wall where 4 pictures had hung, and Alden realized, standing there with the wax running over his knuckles, that he did not know what any of the 4 pictures had been of. The letter was on the mantelpiece under a candlestick. It began with his name and nothing else, Alden, and he had to stop and start again, because in 5 years she had never once written it without the title in front of it, and he had never given her the smallest reason to. You have never been unkind to me. I want that set down first in my own hand, because I know what the world will say and I do not wish it said. You have never raised your voice to me, nor kept me short, nor looked at another woman, nor grudged me anything I asked for that could be bought. I have been 5 years in a house where I am spoken of in the 3rd person. Her Grace will take the small carriage. Her Grace may be consulted about the linen. I have sat at the foot of a table 30 feet long and watched you rise before the suite, and I have gone whole weeks together hearing my own name only from servants. You need not have loved me. I knew what I was when I came. My father's money mended your sea-wall, and I did not expect to be sung to. But I find I cannot go on being furniture in a house I am also mistress of. It is a strange, small, ungrateful sort of grief, and I have not the words for it, and I have stopped trying to find them. I have taken nothing that did not belong to me before I came. Do not send men after me. I have not gone anywhere I can be fetched from with dignity, for either of us. I hope the mill answers. I truly do. Under it she had signed herself Mirabel, without any other word at all. Alden read it 3 times. Then he went down through his own house at 10:30 at night, through rooms he had crossed 10,000 times, and found that he could not have said with any confidence which chair his wife sat in. He did not sleep. He sat in the library with the letter open in front of him and set himself, as a man does with a bad ledger, to find the entry where the loss began. He had married her a month after his father's funeral. That was the first fact and the least of them. Cranemoor at that time was a great beautiful drowning thing, £22,000 of debt, a sea-wall breached in 3 places, a mill standing idle, 400 people on the land looking at him to see what he would do. Mr. Thorpe Hollis of Marchbridge had a fortune out of wool and a daughter, and the thing had been arranged between the lawyers in 11 days, and Alden had stood in a church and made promises in a voice like a man reading a lease. And afterwards he had decided, he could remember deciding it, that was the intolerable part, that he would be scrupulously fair to her. She should have the pearls, the carriages, the servants, the precedence, every farthing of pin money on the quarter day. She had married Cranemoor, and she should have Cranemoor entire. She should not have him because he had nothing left over. There was the sea-wall, and the mill, and the debt, and the 400 people. He had told himself that the work was the love, and that when it was done there would be time. It had taken 5 years, and the mill was answering now, and the wall was sound, and the debt was down to £4,000. He had meant to tell her so at Michaelmas. He could not now recall why he had not. Then in the small hours he found the entry. It had been in the 1st year. There had been people at dinner, the Mersey woman, a bishop, somebody's cousin, and the talk had come round to the tenants at Ford End, and Mirabel had said something about a family there, some question of a roof, and Alden had said, without looking up, in a perfectly level voice. My wife has been 3 months in the county. She will be better informed by and by. The table had laughed. It had been a small, comfortable, well-bred laugh, and it had lasted perhaps 2 seconds. Alden sat in his library at 4 in the morning and understood that he had not heard his wife speak at his own table since that night. Not once. 4 years and 9 months of dinners, and he had thought her a quiet woman. At 6 he was on the road to Marchbridge. Her father received him in a counting house that smelled of wool grease and ink, and did not offer him a chair, and was not rude, which was worse. She is not here, Your Grace. Do you know where she is? I do. Thorpe Hollis put down his pen. He was a heavy, plain-spoken man with his daughter's grey eyes, and he looked at Alden for a long moment across the desk. She has written to me every week for 5 years. 60 months of letters, and I have kept every one of them. He set his hand flat on a locked drawer. In 5 years, Your Grace, she has never once mentioned you. At first I supposed she was being discreet. Alden waited. He knew what was coming and made himself take it standing. Then I understood, said Hollis, that she had nothing to be discreet about. She had gone to Sallow-Combe, a low white house at the end of a lane 40 miles inland, left to her by a godmother along with £80 a year. Alden rode it in a day. Mirabel opened the door herself, in an apron, with flour on her wrists. She was not startled. She looked at him the way a woman looks at weather she has already dressed for. You had better come in, she said. The kettle is on. That undid him more than shouting would have. The room was small and low and smelled of bread. There were 4 pictures on the wall. He looked at them properly at last, and they were watercolours of a river with a stone bridge, done by a young hand, signed M.H. in the corner. Marchbridge, she said, following his eye. I painted them at 16. I did not think anyone at Cranemoor would care to know that, so I never said. Mirabel, come no. I will give you anything you name. I know you will, she said. You always would have. That was never the difficulty. She poured the tea and sat down opposite him with her hands round the cup. I did not leave in order to be fetched, Alden. If I had wanted fetching, I should have gone to my father's, where you would have found me in a day, and everyone would have said what a pretty reconciliation, and I should have been back at the foot of that table by Friday, and it would all have begun again, exactly the same, only now with the memory of having tried. Tell me what to do. That is not mine to tell you. She said it gently, and it landed like a stone in a well. You have never once been cruel to me. I want you to understand that I know it. But I would rather you had shouted at me some once in 5 years. A raised voice is at least addressed to somebody. He rode back to Cranemoor and did not send for her again. What he did instead that autumn was walk his own land on foot, which he had not done since he was a boy, and ask questions to which he did not know the answers. He found her everywhere. There was a school in the Tyther-barn at Ford End, 9 benches, a stove, a slate for every scholar, paid for out of a duchess's pin money and never once mentioned in his hearing. There was a widow at Cold Harbour whose physician's bills had been settled quarterly for 4 years by an unnamed hand. There was a girl gone for training as a dairymaid on somebody's guarantee. At Ford End an old woman with hands like knotted rope said to him, Her Greneau, and then, seeing his face, said it again more slowly, Her Grace. She's the one as knows our names. Alden went home and took down the household book and turned it back 5 years and found, in a round careful hand at the foot of page after page, small requests in the form of questions. Whether the laundry might have a stove before the winter. Whether the almshouse roof was upon the list for the spring. Whether the school might have the use of the barn a second day in the week. Beside each one, in the estate office's clerk lease, crypt, referred. He did all of them before Christmas, and told nobody why. And he began to write to her, 1 letter a week on Sundays. He did not ask her to come back. He had asked once and been answered, and he had at last understood that asking again was only another way of talking about himself. So he wrote instead what he had never said in 5 years at 30 feet of table, that the mill was answering, that the debt stood at 3,200, that the stove was in the laundry and the women had sent up word about it, and he did not know how to answer them. that he had been 24 when his father died and had been frightened every day since and had called it duty because duty was a thing a man might admit to. That he remembered now what he had said at that dinner in the first year and could repeat it word for word and had repeated it to himself most nights since, and was sorry, not generally sorry, but sorry for that sentence in that room in front of those people. She did not answer. He went on writing. In February, the 22nd letter came back to him with 3 words added under his own signature, in her hand: "The roof leaks." He read it standing in the hall for some time. Then he sent 2 men and a load of slate to Salocombe, and did not go himself, and wrote the 23rd letter as though nothing had happened. She answered the 26th. It was 4 lines about the school at Ford End, and a question about whether the second stove had come, and it was signed Mirabell, and he carried it about in his coat until it went soft. At Lady Day he came at last, and asked for 1 hour and got it, and used it to say the whole thing plainly, including the part about being furniture, which he had turned over so many times that he could hold it now without flinching. I told myself the work was the love, he said. It was not. It was only the work. A man can rebuild a sea-wall and never once say his name aloud in his own house, and I did both, and I did not notice I was doing the second. Mirabell sat quite still with her hands in her lap. "You have given me the only thing I ever wanted from you," she said at last, "which is to be spoken to. Then come home. Not because you asked." She looked up and her eyes were wet, and her voice did not shake in the least. "Ask me nothing at all, Alden. Go home and let me have the choosing of it, because in 5 years I have never had the choosing of anything, and I find it is the only dowry I care about now." So he went home and let her alone, which was the hardest thing he had ever done, harder than the debt and the wall and the whole of the 5 years. She came on the 11th of May, on the carrier's cart, with her workbox on her knees and the 4 watercolours wrapped in sacking, and nobody had been told to expect her. Alden was in the library. He heard the front door, and a voice in the hall he had not heard in that house for 8 months, and then, after a while, footsteps on the stairs and along the passage, and then a knock at his own door. He got up so fast that he sent the chair over backwards and opened it. Mirabell stood there with her bonnet still on. "I have come to see," she said, "whether anybody answers." They kept the small dining room after that, and gave up the 30-foot table altogether, and the tenants learned to bring their business to the 2 of them together in the mornings. She spoke at her own table until the servants stopped being astonished by it. The school at Ford End took a second barn, and then a proper house, and her name was cut over the door of it, which she pretended to find ridiculous. And every night of his life, going up, the Duke of Cranemoor knocked at his wife's door before he opened it. Though the door had long since stopped being a door in any sense that mattered, she asked him once why he still troubled, because for 5 years, Alden said, nobody knocked,